Good evening and welcome to Getting Real with Paula. My name is Paula Alphonse, and tonight our guest is Casey Palmer. Casey is a blogger who is using his own fatherhood experience to chronicle the Canadian dad journey. While we hear a lot about the mom experience, we seldom hear about the other side of parenthood. Therefore, Casey started the Canadian Dad platform to show fathers, to allow, should I say, fathers to not only share their stories, but also to showcase the many contributions they make to our families as well as communities. So let's start. Good evening, Casey, and welcome.
Good evening, Paula. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. I am looking forward to this conversation. I
I'm
know
hoping it'll
it.
be a good one.
We're hoping, but I think I have a good vibe for this one.
Excellent,
So, for
excellent.
those of the audience who do not know you, could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, how long you've been blogging, and what brought you to this venture?
Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna adjust from my headlight there. Lighting has been a huge pandemic problem for me, but I'm going to fix it eventually. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm Casey Palmer from the brand Casey Palmer Canadian Dad. It's been a long venture. I've been creating digital content for well over 20 years, but it turned into a fatherhood venture when I had our first son at the end of 2013, and then we had a second son in early 2016. And the thing that made it stand apart was the fact that I kind of hit the ground running. I didn't have a kid and then suddenly decide to start a blog. I'd been blogging already for a while. So the level of storytelling that I was at when I started the journey from, finding out we were expecting to having that first kid was already at a pretty seasoned level, which has made for a interesting experience for my community as they follow me on my fatherhood journey.
Thank you. And what were your intention when you first started? You mentioned you started blogging way before,
Mhm.
and I guess back then you didn't have any idea as to where you were gonna do, whether there was even gonna be a Canadian Dad
Oh my goodness.
experience.
It's so true.
So, what happened?
It's funny. That's a really good question, Paula, because in the beginning, I just creating stuff online for fun. I made my first website in 1998 for a school project, and I made my first blog in 2001. And back then, it was just, let's see what happens when I put words on the internet. Let's see what happens when it all comes together. And the entire idea of creating a business or a movement around it was the farthest thing from my mind. In fact, when our first kid was coming along, I thought I was going to give it up. I thought, I have a kid in my life. I have no idea what's going to happen, what my time's going to look like. So maybe I just finish with this phase of my life and move on to fatherhood, and what happens, happens. But I had some friends who kind of intervened, and they said, you know what? We don't have a lot happening in the fatherhood space online right now. There's no one sharing that story. And you're already, you know, a pro at this from the entire technical side of it. Why don't you take your experiences, and put it together into something that other people can resonate with? And so that started what has been a 7.5 year journey so far of just telling the story of being a dad and trying to fill a void, which, is getting smaller slowly, but it still has a lot of need for fatherhood stories out there, definitely.
Okay, so how does it feel like now to be considered a dad influencer?
Bizarre, entirely bizarre. Oh my goodness, Paula. Like people will come up to me and they see me as a parenting expert, and it's like, I have a 7-year old. There's no expertise whatsoever here. I basically just try every day to make sure that my children do all right by the end of the day. It's simply because I was one of the earliest people doing it, and I keep doing it. Like, a lot of people have stopped blogging in my original cadre of dads.
Mhm.
They've, people get busy, their interests fall
Mhm.
elsewhere. It's something that is really hard to sustain over time. So I fully appreciate that. But I found that it's almost interwoven into my DNA at this point, that I've been doing it for so long that now it's just an element of my persona and who I am. That yeah, it's at a very interesting place, because I'm at the point now where someone at work, my day job, mentioned that they were going to be talking to me, and the other person on the other end of the line was like, "You mean Casey Palmer, Canadian dad?" And I was like, "Oh, we're there now. We're at the point where there's a name brand recognition. Okay, it's not a bad problem, but at the same time, it's one of those things you never fully, if you're, unless you have a business plan where you're like, I
Mhm.
want to be at this level by this date,
Mhm.
I want to have this number of
Mhm.
followers, or I want to be in these chat. I'm just like, I just write stuff, and what happens happens. And now it so happens that people are starting to recognize it out there in the internet, which
Mhm.
is a very peculiar feeling. But I always learn from those experiences, and I always adjust to make sure that I put, my family's interest before mine.
Yeah.
While,
Mhm.
I know a lot of parents out there will put out all the embarrassing stuff and stuff like that, but you don't want to put your kids in a position where, kids are making fun of them at school for
Yeah.
something online. You don't want to put your spouse in a position where haven't considered their feelings and things like that.
Mhm.
So all that goes through my head as I put things together to make sure that I prioritize them above what might be a good quick hit for numbers.
I love it. This segues into the other question that comes to mind, which is what have you discovered about fatherhood in Canada along this journey so far? Because it's 7 years. You must have picked up a few things.
A few things here and there. It's really interesting. You know what it is that, we think of Canadian dads, and you might have a certain trope, like, white dads are in the woods doing their thing. Black dads are, more urban and whatever, and, love jazz and hip hop and other things like that. But it's a lot more diverse than that. There's a lot of stories that go untold, because I think the one constant across most dads is that we are horrible communicators. We do not share what is happening in our worlds whatsoever, and it just ends up in a void. And I like to put together the stat all the time that, if you look at the 2016 census, we have about 4.5 million dads and 5.5 million moms, whereas, so they're pretty equivalent. But at the same time, you have 50 dad influencers from coast to coast and something like 3,000 moms. So I'm just like, there's something going on there when it comes down to like dad just not talking about what's going on in their lives. And so that's what makes us stand out quite a bit, is the fact that I've grown to be so honest with what's going on in our world and what's happening, because that's what I've developed as a style over time. Now I'm just like, I'm going to talk about, the kids being home and how much of a strain that is on our lifestyles. I'm going to talk about race and gender politics and everything. I'm just like, bring it all. Let's just go. Let's just bring it all out and get out of the system. But it works out really well, because I think people think that dads are generally, pretty one dimensional, and there's a lot more than, there's different dads on different walks of life. So I try my best to have different conversations with all sorts of people, because you never know where someone's going to fall with their perspective.
Definitely. Can you describe some of the realities you have encountered in these larger conversation with other dads?
Yeah, not everyone's going to like you is something you need to
Uh,
accept as a parent really, really quickly. Right? Like, woo, some of the conversations I've gotten in. There's, if you stay within your social circle and you stay within your safe zone, you're probably quite likely going to find most people agree with you on things, unless you get something that's really
mhm,
polarizing.
mhm,
As soon as you step outside of that, every time I do a news, broadcast on something around Black History Month, like haters come out of the woodwork every single time I talk about, not wanting to lock my two children into like, the typical boy stuff,
mhm,
boys toys, boys clothes, boys colors. And I'm like,
mhm,
I just want them to figure things out on their own, and I'll support them. The haters come out of the woodwork. I've gotten so used to the fact that there are these people who have really strong contrasting opinions
Mm-hmm.
is a reality. But I feel that I'm at a point now where, you know, I like telling people that the people whose opinions matter most are the people who live in my house. If they're mad at me, if there's a problem between us, me and them, that's a real problem, and I have to deal with that. If anyone else, for the most part, you know, disagrees with me, we if we're close, we'll have a good conversation. If we're not, I'm like, well, that's not my problem right now because I have other things to prioritize. So I've grown a thicker skin because of it over time. I want to know that everyone to know that I appreciate their opinions and I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate having the conversations,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to lose sleep over something unless I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll call it out and I will fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But other if it's such a difference of opinions, I'm like, all right, you be you, I be me, we'll be okay.
In terms of this journey so far, the public one as well as the more private one,
Mm-hmm.
what were for you some of the lesson learned or personal discoveries that you made along the way?
There's so many. Paul, do you have 5 hours?
Let's start. Give me a couple, 2 or 3, and we'll see. Because we're trying to assess. They're looking at you as the influencer. What are you bringing to the table in those
That's
7
fair.
years? What have I
That's
picked
fair.
up?
There's okay, some of the good ones. I think one of the strongest ones I've really taken home is that I am my father's child. And what we often think of when we're young and teenagers and whatnot is like, I'm never going to be like you. Like, oh, all these things you do that I don't like, I'm never going to do them. And then you one day catch yourself doing them. You're like, oh, oh, I am a product of my environment. And what I'm trying to teach my children right now is that good or bad, you know, everything that I can give them or everything I do to impact them is a result of intergenerational change, right? I didn't come into this world from square one. I came here on the backs of my parents and all the
Mhm,
sacrifices and things they
mhm,
did. They did the same with their parents, etc. And we have to figure out over those generations what we keep, what we discard, what works, what
mhm,
doesn't, what is a part of the culture we're trying to hone with our children today. And that has been a huge part of just understanding, you know, what is it that I can glean from everything I do for them. And at the same time, you know, I say that when I talk about everything I do for them, one part of it is, you know, we come into parenthood wanting to give our children everything that we never had. Except you start to understand after a while that everything we never had, not all of it is good stuff. They only need so many toys. They only need
mhm,
so many treats. They only need
mhm,
so many times out at like whatever theme parks or whatever.
mhm,
And so it's been understanding what is it that I need to contribute to my kids to make sure that we're maximizing our interactions and the time we have together. And the pandemic has taught me a lot of that too, because before that, I thought being a good dad meant, you know, showing up to all the events and
mhm,
you know, reading them stories at night, taking them where they want to go. But I feel like the pandemic has taught me so much more about who my children are and
mhm,
understanding them as individuals instead of them just being my children as like a default thing. So now they're like, you know, it's, you know, 7-year old, 5-year old, they are there. I know their likes and dislikes. I know how they like to interact. I know how they like to play. Before
mhm,
that, it was just kind of like, here, throw spaghetti at the wall, hope it sticks, basically, with
mhm.
the approach of like how it all works. So a lot of learning, a lot of development, but I feel like I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job as per the reviews I get from my family on a regular basis. You know, they tell me, no, I check them like, we're doing okay. You still like me, right? Okay. Still getting hugs every day. So far, so good.
I love when you said we're all products of our environment because there are things we didn't realize that we've internalized until
Mm-hmm.
they come out of your mouth or there's a
Mm-hmm.
behavior or a thought and you're like, oh my God, I am my parent. But
Mm-hmm.
there's also the part I really like about the pandemic, the comment. And there's a lot of things we think children need.
Mm-hmm.
But in real life, in reality, what they want is more time
Mm-hmm.
with you. And that's what the pandemic gave us. But not everybody is enjoying that journey because in that there's, and I'm not going to pretend there's so many change that you have to juggle with, that not everybody has that mindset where
Hmm.
how can I enjoy my kids and the time we spend together even more, because it is in those moments that you learn so much, as you said, about your kids. Before, you might have not even known what were their favorite hero or
Hmm.
their, I don't know, favorite colors, that little girl that they used to see at school, or whatever it is. You would not have known because you were in a rush to going through the
All the
process.
time. Hmm.
Now, pandemic has made us slow down. And finally, we start realizing maybe all of those things we didn't have didn't really matter.
That's true.
And no need to transfer just things, commodities. It's about building who they are, building their sense of self.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is the hardest lesson you have learned so far as a Black man and a Black father?
I think it's the notion that there's only so much I can protect them from in the world.
Yeah.
Really, when it comes down to it, I can't live their lives for them. All I can do is arm them with the knowledge and the sensibilities of what's outside that front door. Within these four walls, within these four walls, I want them to know they're loved and that I don't judge them and that they can come to me with anything and we can have, a thorough discussion on whatever it is that's bothering them. And we have, and people think that 7 and 5 might be too young and too early to have certain conversations, but it really isn't. And they take on viewpoints and the information from the world around them at a very young age.
Mhm.
So it's up to us to actually go forward and have those important conversations with them when the time and situation feels right. But at the same time, you think you know the world and you think you know what's going on
Yeah.
out there, and you don't always. Things will blindside you all the time. And I used to say that the problem I usually had after after you get past daycare and your kids start going to school, I first said that my problem was other people's kids because they can bully, they can do things and whatnot.
Mhm.
Like you can't control what happens on the schoolyard. But I thought farther about it and I was like, I think my problem is other parents. I think my problem is other parents who choose different ways of teaching their children, or they don't have the same sense of right or wrong, or they are passing down ideologies to their kids which aren't healthy.
Mhm.
And so I could try all I want to make sure that I have, kids who are perfect gentlemen and they have respect. And, I drive a lot of values home to them every single day because they were important to my parents to give to me. So I do the same to them. Not everyone else has the same value set. And that's something that I have to kind of sit with. And when they bring home the hard questions of like, well, Timmy doesn't do this or Tina doesn't do that. And I'm like, this is why it's important to our family and
Yeah.
why we do this thing. And it doesn't always, it doesn't always work, but I feel like there's always those moments where they're like, in their late teens, early adulthood, and they suddenly come up. It's like, well, I did this because you always said this. And it's like, oh, you
Mhm.
were listening. You were listening all those years. Okay. So I just have to keep at it, basically.
And I have to be honest with you when you say it's never too early to start having those conversations with your kids. And I'm not talking specific conversation. It's never too early to start building that conversation,
Hmm.
because that conversation you want to still have in when they're 15, when they're 25, when they're 35. You start building it early, because if you haven't learned it before they get to a certain age, it's going to be so much more work to
Definitely.
break that connection back in. And that's sometimes the mistake we make, because we think they're too young, they don't get later, later, later. Every now and then go back to that conversation about starting to talk to them early.
Yes.
The challenge will always be, as you're building that connection, you have to build the blocks. If you don't
Hmm.
start early, it's not going to happen later on. So
Exactly.
that's on us. And this is pandemic, regardless of everything that comes with it. This is the ripe time to actually
Hmm.
start having all conversation, because those are not the regular happening. Usually sometimes you are hoping to have those conversation during Christmas time and maybe during the summertime, but now you we're having a year and up going, so might
It's
as
true.
well maximize that time and see how we can do better. And I'm hoping that as a society we will all get better
Hmm.
out of the pandemic rather than things would go worse. We're hoping, we're just hoping.
Definitely.
If I was to ask you, I'm gonna just mention one sentence and ask you to finish what it
Okay.
is. If I tell you fatherhood is, what comes to mind?
Fatherhood is the best decision I ever made. Fatherhood makes me a better version of myself than I was before. And I say that very confidently because I have the benefit of having created and journaled, my thoughts for so long that I can see where I was at before. Um, I actually just finished writing a piece this morning on men's mental health that I'm, putting together for a project later on. But I can tell that before, dating my wife and getting married, having kids and everything, I was so lost. And you're trying to latch onto all these things to find a sense of value or find a sense of purpose, and it can be really hard. And for men especially, who when we're not taught to communicate, when we're not taught to emote, it's a journey you so often end up traveling on your own. So it becomes super important to have something that makes you feel like you're contributing something positive to the world. And I feel like for me, my children are often that. That said, I mean, it's not a cakewalk. There's good, bad, glad, sad, everything in between. Like it's not easy to be a parent whatsoever.
Mhm,
But I do feel that it anchors me to something that has meaning. I think that if you are kind of, I know less and less people, at least in Toronto and around me, are having children and, finding life partners and things like that. Um, Going into, just choosing to go other ways because they have other values. But I wouldn't want to feel like I ever hit a point in my life where I look back with regrets because of the decisions I'd made or not made, or look back and feel like I wasted a bunch of time because I chose not to do something. I feel like so many people fear that when they have children, they have to give up their lives. But I
mhm,
often tell people children add to your lives. You don't understand it at first, but the longer you go into it, the more you realize you have parts of yourself that you can share with them, that you'll see someone who just appreciates that, that part of you with adoration, and they're just in awe of just like, oh, you know how to do what? You can do that. And it's a very different experience than with any other people you'll have in your life. So fatherhood is everything to me in a lot of ways. But everything, I'll take breaks from it where I can find it though. 100%. I won't lie.
I totally agree with you. I have, as I said, I also have kids, and I do believe that they've made me a better person. They made me think about the larger society rather
Hmm.
than just me, what I wanted, how I wanted it. I
Hmm.
started with my kids wanting them to be a certain way and
Hmm.
then realized they changed me. So that person, that version of what I thought I was bringing, they made so much more fuller. And it's,
Yes.
yeah, it goes both ways. They feed, they feed us with their energy and their love, but they also stretch our own understanding of what love is and what is meaningful in life. If you know me just a little bit, I'm all about boundaries. So I'm going
Okay.
to ask, what boundary have you implemented in your personal and or professional life that has created the most personal growth for you?
I've realized, I've really understood that time is our only non-renewable resource, so we have to be very careful about how we use it. And when I say that, it manifests itself in a number of ways. I realized, I think it was early 2019, that I could only work so hard. So
Hmm.
the one thing that has been a gift and a curse of my brand is that, I'm a perfectionist, so I really dove into how do I write, a blog post that perfectly captures what I was going on in my head. How do I do all the technical stuff to make sure it gets out to the maximum number of eyeballs and things like that? Like, I've built up a brand that is still growing. And it's funny because people say blogging is dead. I'm like, is it? Is it though? And that's a totally separate conversation. But with that said, the opportunities have grown and there's so many more chances to go out and do things. But I realized I got to a point where I had gotten, more than I had the personal capacity for, because emails are going unanswered. I was juggling too many things, and I just, without getting more bodies, there's only so much I had the ability to do. And so I realized I had to work smarter, and I had to find ways to salvage time while also making sure to prioritize, Sarah and my kids first, because they are the most important part of that equation. And yeah, it's been tough to figure out how to navigate all that. And I always say that I have three parts of my life between a day job, a night job, and the family, and always try to, like, keep those in
Hmm.
balance is challenging, but it's so important to understand where your priorities lie and how to reprioritize on the fly and say no when something just doesn't fit that model, because that'll happen all the time. And you have to constantly know what is going to, bring not only yourself but your entire family value, so that you're not making too many selfish decisions or anything of that nature. So that's been an ongoing learning lesson that I'm still chipping away at.
I think it's a good lesson to learn because, in the end, family is what the whole journey is
Hmm.
about. Those connections, those relationships that we've built are going to make it meaningful. Nothing we can purchase. There's only 24 hours in a day, and
Yep.
eventually there's a time to go. So, what does the future hold for you now?
Ooh, you know what? Part of me thinks way into the future of, like, when the kids are older, have I set themselves up correctly and everything? And part of me is like, I can only think of today. I know today, and then after that, I don't really have anything in between that gap. That said, um, a renewed focus on kind of what I'm trying to build with the brand has given me, another few years of, like, definitive work ahead of me of what I need to do. I'm also working on a book on Black fatherhood, which I landed a publishing deal out of the blue at the end of last summer, which I feel very grateful for, because the steps usually involved in getting to a book are long and complicated, and I had no time for that. So I was happy when it just kind of showed up. I'm like, yes, let's do this thing. So that's probably the most immediate future. So I have the manuscript due later into June, and then the tentative launch date is, or book release date is, next year June. So there's going to be a year of edits and all the other fun things that come with putting a book together. But the premise of the book started off as kind of like, okay, well, here's my journey as a Black dad. But I think, as I was alluding to before, the entire idea of Black fatherhood is not just one experience. There's so much diversity in it, whether it's, talking about from our cultural backgrounds, religious, lifestyle choices, family makeup, all that. So I want to write a book that honors the
Mhm.
spectrum of Black fatherhood and not just one experience. And it's a tough thing to do, but it's something that is very important to me to get right. So I'm working away on that.
I love that. And it's a work in progress.
Mm,
Every day we are all work in progress.
indeed.
So, what would be one key message you would want to leave with our female listeners and our male listeners? Haha, because
Ooh,
we're talking
I
about
like it.
kids and dad. You still
I
need to
like it.
address the mothers.
I like it. Okay. to all the moms out there, I put a podcast out a couple years back, and it was titled "Give Me Some Room to Fail," because dad most dads are not conditioned to do this well. Like we learn as we go, and we are going to flounder and everything. Moms have so much better communication skills and support networks, and dads are kind of like coming out of the dark, like, what am I supposed to do now? You want to do what with that? I have to change this what? Like everything is confusing. Like, there's so few dads I know who got it right from day one. So we need to like have the room to just mess up, because we're going to. It's just something we do well. But enough practice and we get it right, and we get there after a while. And I think giving, dads a little room to fail and figure things out is very healthy and very helpful to get them to reach their potential as fathers. And to male listeners, I'd say don't beat yourself up that much, because you will figure it out. I know that even with my first son, I didn't really feel connected to him for the first 6 months, because I just felt like a secondary parent. I was like, okay, so I'm helping you while I do the night feeds, and I just kind of help you get where you need to go. And I was juggling that and work at the same time. So I was just kind of like, I just came in, saw for a bit, put him to bed, all that kind of stuff. But I didn't really feel that connected until the first time he smiled, because I was in the room and not for some random reason. And that's when I was finding like, it's going to be okay. We're going to work this out. It's going to be good. But I feel like I've come up with a bit of a theory that, I know from a lot of my research and searching things online, one of the most popular search terms related to dads is like, why do dads leave? And deadbeat dads is a common topic. And I feel like in so many cases, if dads spend that first 6 to 12 months with those kids, they probably won't go anywhere, because you just need to give it a chance to understand that bond and build it. If you leave before the kid's born, you never really get that chance. And trying to repair that later on, it's tough. I've heard so many stories from dads who, the ones who chose to leave or ones who didn't have the opportunity for various other reasons. And it's hard to rebuild that later. So I would put it like a, mandatory of 1 year, just like figure it out. And then after that, if things have to happen, so be it, but give it a year, see how it goes. And I promise, all the dads who are worried and don't know what they're getting into, and they are trying to finish everything on that to-do list because they don't think they're going to have any time to do anything ever again in their lives, it'll be okay. Take it one day at a time, and you'll be surprised at who you become after you give it a little time.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you. Moms also fly by the seats of their pants every now and then. So I'm not gonna pretend. There were times where it's just like, oh my God, what have I done? Okay, let's go. We're done to do this. But inside, whew, this could have gone really wrong. So it's not just a male thing. We also have our moments. So how can people get in contact with you and hear more about your future activities?
Sure. I am at caseypalmer.com, CASEYPALMER.com, down there. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to get my own name on my site, and I connect everything through there. I'm constantly working at making it better. So all my social media handles are on there, links to podcast episodes I put out in the past, links to almost everything I do is through there. And there's a newsletter to subscribe to. There's you can subscribe to getting new post updates when they come out. Or, I'm Casey Palmer on Instagram, Case P on Twitter. I'm everywhere. So if you get to the site, you'll find everywhere I am. And I apologize in advance for the oversharing that's going to happen, because I always have a device in my hands. So I'm sorry for everyone, but it's okay. You'll love it. I promise. It's all good. It's all heartfelt. It'll be quality. There's just a lot of it.
But once we get used to all the material, it will be like, oh, this is the go-to person for my information. We don't do Google anymore. We'll just do Casey Palmer.
There
see
you go.
what comes up.
Well, it's funny because, a lot of people, you get the big influencers and they talk about their followers or their audience, but I always see it as a community. I can teach and I can also learn. And there's been plenty of times where maybe I thought I was right on something and found out I was wrong, or I realized there's so many more ways to look at things than the way I just see it alone. So I think it's important to just build up that community around you. So it takes a village. And if that village
It
happens to be on
takes
the
a
internet
village.
sometimes, I'll go with it.
Hmm. Yeah, it takes a village. And I think that's what we all need to remember because whether we want to admit it, we had gone so individualistic that we forgot about the
Mm-hmm.
larger community.
Mm-hmm.
Reminder came back through COVID. So it's just this sense where
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, let me think about that. And as you were saying, community for community, we don't have the same values, but there are, as a parent, so many things that still brings us together. So it's figuring out how do we connect and figure out what's the path forward as
Definitely.
parents with their kids, as families, as communities.
Definitely.
Anyway, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, thank
Thank
you,
you.
thank you for being so easy to work with and so free with your advice, information, and everything. It's been a blast.
Hey, thank you so much, Paula. It's much appreciated.